Speaking of slavery,
Constitution.
so it comes out. You remember that court case that Rand Paul was involved in, where he got beat up by his neighbor for being such a jerk or something? I'm not sure. I don't know the details of this, and this is not Judge Judy. I don't care.
I
frankly.
believe there was a leaf raking dispute.
Judge Judy, he's denying first principle.
It's possible Rand Paul was upset because this guy had hybrid peach trees and thinks that's the way that our bodily fluids are being drained from us. Who knows? But Rand Paul had he's got a lawsuit against his neighbor, and the Louisville Courier-Journal reported that there was a revelation in these papers about a surgery scheduled for a week from now or so, 2 weeks from now, January 21st. Maybe Paul was going to be out of town or something. I don't know exactly why it would be in these papers. But and the interesting about it is, as you know, we have the greatest healthcare system in the world. Princes come from all around the world to come here to get their healthcare. However, libertarians apparently go to the socialized medicine mecca of Canada when they need hernia surgery. He is headed to Canada to have surgery at the Shouldice Hernia Hospital, which I don't know exactly where in Canada it is, but it's going to cost $8,000. He's going to buy it. He's going to pay for it because he's not a Canadian citizen. You can go in, you can pay for the services. I imagine a Canadian, if they wanted to, could go pay for the services. But if you were Canadian, it would be covered. I guess the reason why it was in this thing, because it was related to the injuries he suffered when he was beat up. And it is a privately owned hospital, right? But almost all of its work is done under contract with the Ontario government in Canada. So in other words, it runs under the auspices of a single-payer system. Privately owned hospital that is paid for its services either by an individual who decides, because he's coming from another country because he's a libertarian and only he wants to try some of this good old socialized health insurance, and the system it supports is going to pay for himself. But if he was Canadian, he could go to that same hospital, and the hospital would take the money, the payment from the Ontario government, because it accepts Ontario's hospital insurance plan, which is part of the nation's public health care system.
Maybe it's like how Alex Jones smokes pot once a year just to remember how bad it is.
Right. Exactly.
I got to keep aware.
You got to stay aware. Now, I will remind you, the disgusting part about this, okay, is what it says.
Rand Paul?
What Rand Paul is doing. Because the employees at this hospital, it's a privately run hospital, but you understand they are paid predominantly. There are people like Rand Paul who come in and pay, but the vast majority of the business they do is accepting payments from the Canadian government under their single-payer system. And we all know what these doctors are. They're not just doctors. They're not just Canadian doctors. Rand Paul will tell you what they are because of the single-payer system.
With regard to the idea of whether or not you have a right to a health care, you have to realize what that implies. It's not an abstraction. I'm a physician. That means you have a right to come to my house and conscript me. It means you believe in slavery. It means that you're going to enslave not only me, but the janitor at my hospital, the person who cleans my office,
everyone,
the assistants who work in my office, the nurses. If you have a right to their services, Basically, once you imply a belief in a right to someone's services, do you have a right to plumbing? Do you have a right to water? Do you have a right to food? You're basically saying that you believe in slavery. You're saying you believe in taking and extracting from another person. Our founding documents were very clear about this. You have a right to pursue happiness, but there's no guarantee of physical comfort. There's no guarantee of concrete items. In order to give something concrete or someone's surface, you got to take it from someone. So there's an implied threat of force. If I'm a physician in your community and you say you have a right to health care, do you have a right to beat down my door with the police, escort me away, and force me to take care of you? That's ultimately what the right to free health care would be. If you
Now, wait a second. Put aside the fact that the hypocrisy involved in this, right, with the going to the clinic, because he's getting service from people he believes are slaves.
He's literally personally using
he
slave labor.
is personally taking advantage of these slaves. But does that mean, according to Rand Paul, if I have a right to property, that I can take any of your stuff? I mean, if I have a right to property, does that mean that I can necessarily conscript all your stuff? Is that right absolute that I can actually force you to get? I have a right to property. Give me your bag. It's absurd. It's just an absurd construction.
Well, if he wants to talk about slavery and coercion, which does he think is more coercive? A system where everybody works a decent amount and gets free health care that they need as a form of social insurance, or a society where people have to work 2 jobs or they starve to death and they don't know that they're going to have
you don't have a
healthcare.
right to food or health care. But the absurdity of his argument is just that the idea that people having a right to health care is a right that necessarily has to be fulfilled by specific individuals. I mean, it's just absurd. It's just absurd. I have a right to property, and that obligates the state to defend property that is mine, that has been acquired by means in which the state deems to be appropriate.
I just appreciate
That does not mean that I have the right to go and take your Puma shirt. Because I have a right to property. That's just absurd.
That'd be so funny.
Well,
it's
he
just absurd.
He starts the theft in the wrong place, right? When you talk about, he thinks that taxes are theft, right? And, the majority of taxes come from the wealthy and the corporations, right? I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that's a lot of taxes. But where does he think they got that money in the first place?
Well,
they got it from exploiting other people's labor.
Yeah, but I mean, even before that, whose money is it?
Well, yeah. Why does that money have
You
value?
don't have the right. You don't have the right to
resources?
take the dollars out of your pocket and burn them. You can get arrested for that. It's because it's not your money.
Remind me the next time I light a spliff, bro.
Right. I mean, this is just absurd. The idea that this guy is responsible for such a significant portion of our legislation, right? As a senator, relative to everybody else around us.
Can we take a moment to
Just
appreciate the
absurd.
fact that the Constitution actually and things like the Federalist Papers are challenging and interesting and of course problematic, but also documents that we can work with in some ways, and that the founding fathers were not actually if the Constitution literally read first principles are that anything that involves an inconvenience upon me that's the real slavery by your logic. The Constitution and the founding documents gave everybody enough room, or even having people who were cool from the beginning, like Thomas Paine, where MLK could be this is actually how it is, right? But if they actually wrote like that, that would be a real bummer.
Well, it was
We were contending the Constitution, but the Constitution really was and now a thought experiment.
Exactly.
It was a necessary step in human development. And I think capitalism was an improvement over feudalism, right? The bourgeois state being something that arose with capitalism and upholds it. And there are some good things about liberal values, right? We don't want to get rid of freedom of speech. We don't want to get rid of, all those good ideals that come from the French, right? Liberté, égalité, fraternité. We just want to like do a better job at guaranteeing those rights for real in our next phase of, whatever we come up with.
Rand Paul as Kunta Kinte.
I will not treat that sick child.
You're like, you will, doctor. You will. Your freedom is not yours. You'll give that boy an inhaler.
I will not treat the sick dying child.
Well, I mean, according to Rand Paul, as soon as you say healthcare is a right, then what will happen is that people will be mandated to go to, they will be mandated to become doctors. Like at birth,
Right.
you will be determined based upon,
It's
I
like
don't
some
know.
type of sci-fi movie.
Exactly.
Like you go through, like you get screened, and you're like, you will be a doctor. People can go to your house at any time of day. Anybody who works for you, including even doing just paperwork, is also conscripted. That's in the Medicare for All. It's in Bernie's bill. It's like, this is also the surgeons or slaves amendment, so that, in my opinion, anytime you should have so much as a snifful,
Well,
you
this
should
is-
be able to go to any goddamn doctor's house you
This
want.
is the problem with
and get care.
libertarianism. It's so theoretical
Is that
that
they're
they
fucking
presume too that everything is going to be to function along these sort of like rigid lines, so that that there is no, first of all, there is no absolute right in our society. There's no one who has absolute rights to anything. Like I say, don't have an absolute right to property. Some property is yours, some property is mine. The state intervenes to determine who legitimately owns it. You weren't.
Oh yeah, at which court?
You didn't come out of the womb owning that Puma sweatshirt.
Yes, I did, and even talking about it is tantamount to slavery. I'm a United States senator.
It's.
Fucking think about that for a second.
I know it.
They have a very limited understanding of coercion. I'll
Well,
leave it at
that's
that.
also true.
That's the angle that I would usually come at a right wing libertarian along, because
Well-
they say that they respect people's freedom to make voluntary choices or reject certain choices as the case may be, but most people don't have that freedom on
This
your
boy-
system.
this
that whole thing is sort of like this again gets to the arbitrariness of like the non-aggression principle, right? The non-aggression principle says you cannot touch me, cause me pain by hitting me with your fist. So does that mean if you have a laser, can your laser do it? Can you do it with a stick? Can you do it just by if you have the ability to sort of like what about like those audio? What about those? What was that audio weapon that they used at Zuccotti?
brown note?
No, at Zuccotti Park. They used these
Sound cannons.
sound cannons.
Or
Well,
can
but-
you do it by taking away somebody's health care?
Well, that's my point. Is that like I'm going to collect all the money and keep you from having any money to pay for health care. How's that?
yeah, it's the violence of the status quo that they refuse to recognize. I don't know why. Maybe some of them are privileged. Maybe they're just dumb. I don't know.
This
Yes.
girl,
It's
this
'cause
young
they
girl
stop
has,
where they go
has
with
a
it.
high-pitched fever, and you will treat her, boy.
No, I won't.
He just like struggling, like the kid is about to die, and they're trying to force the stethoscope into Rand Paul's hands. He's just like,
You
No,
cannot
it starts
compel
before
me.
that. It starts before that. She is sick. Now sit down. Start reading how to become a doctor. You're going to stay here and you're going to study, and then you're going to do well on that test, and then you're going to start surgery.
before you know it, you're gonna be a goddamn brain surgeon.
We've got-
and there ain't nothing you can do about it.
Press gang people like a pirate into being doctors. Just
Yeah.
a ship full of pirate doctors.
Tell you now, boy.
There's an underground railroad
tell
to
you
bring
that-
people out of Canada. So
I'll
they can
tell
be
you
free.
now, boy. You start cutting into that man's brain. Fix his brain. You're
Looks
gonna
like that
spend some
child's
time.
got eczema. I think you
You're gonna
better get him
spend
a
some time in the
steroid prescription
stockades.
right now.
Bring me the switch.
There's an underground railroad where we can charge over for plastic surgery. We can get people on a secret tunnel out of Canada for freedom. So doctors can have liberty.